October 1917, and the guns on the Western Front had been firing for 3 years. To the troops in the trenches, it seemed as if the war would last forever, a nightmare of machines against men. But on the 15th of October 1917, all eyes were focused on the grim fortress of Vincennes near Paris, and on one woman who was to be executed there, Mata Hari, the spy said to have used sex to secure vital military secrets from Germany. Nearly 80 years after her death, Mata Hari remains the 20th century's most powerful icon of female betrayal. Her career as an exotic dancer and as a spy was surrounded by myths created by herself and the men who finally destroyed her. But was Mata Hari ever a spy? Or was she innocent of the crimes with which she was charged at a military tribunal held in the darkest days of the First World War? Was Mata Hari the spy who never was? Mata Hari was born plain Margaretha Zelle in the provincial Dutch town of Leeuwarden in 1876. Her upbringing was comfortable, conventional, and bourgeois. Her father Adam was a hatter, sufficiently important to join the Guard of Honor when the Dutch royal family visited his hometown. For a while, the Zelle family prospered, but it broke up when Adam Zelle went bankrupt, leaving the young Margaretha to be farmed out to live with a succession of relatives in The Hague. Nearby was the beach resort of Scheveningen, a favorite haunt of officers on leave from the Dutch colonies in the East Indies. Margaretha loved men in uniform. She was to meet one of them at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam in 1895. It was a fateful encounter. He was Rudolph MacLeod, an army officer of Scottish descent who had spent 10 hard years in the colonies. He was looking for a wife, but at 38 he was twice the age of the lovely young woman to whom he quickly proposed. Margaretha married MacLeod 4 months after their first meeting. Soon afterwards she joined her husband in Sumatra. In the sultry heat of the East Indies, the marriage rapidly broke down. Margaretha tried to live the life of an officer's wife, but the lush and colourful surroundings of Sumatra stirred a strong sensual streak within her, driving her middle-aged husband to fits of jealous rage. Margaretha was fascinated by the way the women of Sumatra harnessed dance and song, whether working in the fields or dressed for the more intricate and erotic rituals of court and religion. The grace and symbolism of their movements planted a seed in the young European woman's mind. It was here, in the sultry heat of the tropics, that the legend of Mata Hari was born. Then tragedy intervened. Margaretha's small daughter and her son were struck by food poisoning. The boy survived, but the little girl died. Margaretha left her husband and sailed for Europe. She settled in Paris. The mellow stone of Notre Dame was a long way from the jungles of Sumatra. This was the Paris of the Belle Époque. Above all, it was the city of the courtesan. Dubbed les grandes horizontales, these languid beauties used their lovers not only to acquire wealth, but also to wield social and sometimes political power. Show business and sex were the keys to fame and fortune. It was part of the natural order of things in France. A man might attend his wife in the morning, but in the afternoon he visited his mistress. In this heady atmosphere, Margaretha Zelle reinvented herself as an exotic oriental dancer. Drawing on her experiences in the colonies, she developed a westernized version of the temple dances she had watched in Sumatra. Armed with breastplates and the bogus title of Lady MacLeod, she passed herself off as the native East Indian wife of an English aristocrat. Later, she became Mata Hari, which in Malay means Eye of the Day. As Mata Hari, she instantly touched a raw, erotic nerve. She quickly became a star. She relied on semi-nudity and the support of sympathetic journalists and society hostesses. One of the hostesses was the American Natalie Baum.
She was a dark beauty with a very beautiful figure. But to my remembrance, she lacked charm. And I preferred her war dances to her more exotic performances, which were the beginning of the striptease. I think she was very vain of herself and wanted to produce herself as much as she could. In fact, she produced herself too much at the end. She should have realized the dangers she was in. She lived dangerously.
Mata Hari continually refashioned her life history to fit new circumstances. Few questioned the stories she told about herself. But she was already spinning a web of fiction in which eventually she would be trapped. If Margaretha Zelle could invent a whole new life to launch herself as a star, so others could invent an imaginary past to destroy her. By 1910, Mata Hari was one of the highest paid dancers in Europe. She had joined the ranks of the Grande Horizontale. Great musical figures courted her. Puccini sent his personal congratulations after watching one of Mata Hari's performances. The composer of the ballet Puccini had seen, the 65-year-old Jules Massenet, avidly pursued her. Rich and powerful lovers came and went, showering her with money, furs and houses. Mata Hari was now a leading society figure. Her reputation as an insatiable man-eater provoked a mixture of admiration and envy. High-ranking members of the military were Mata Hari's favorite escorts. She had developed a taste for the company of officers long before her marriage, but her exalted status now ensured that she could take generals into her bed. But rank was no guarantee of Mata Hari's favors. She declared that she would rather sleep with a poor officer than a rich banker. On her first visit to Berlin, a city she cordially hated, Mata Hari sought out the men in uniform. The lover she found was a young army officer and amateur pilot, Lieutenant Capt. He took her to watch the Imperial Army on maneuvers in Silesia. It was an innocent enough outing, but at Mata Hari's trial in 1917, this excursion was dredged up as evidence that the dancer was a spy. Back in Paris, she discovered to her dismay that her supremacy was threatened by a small army of imitators. They were younger, and their costumes were even more revealing than those worn by the exotic original. Mata Hari left Paris to score a triumph in one of the greatest opera houses in the world, La Scala in Milan, where she appeared in an opera by Gluck. In the same season, she created a sensation in a ballet by scorning a blonde wig for the role of Venus and dancing in her own dark hair. Then, at a private party in Rome, she achieved a long-held ambition by dancing as Salome to Richard Strauss's music. In August 1914, Mata Hari was in Berlin. She was broke. Her figure was thickening, and 40 was looming. So was war. Millions of men were on the move in a mobilization that could not be reversed. Mata Hari was, for the moment, stranded behind enemy lines. Temporarily, the uniforms lost their appeal. The commanders and the men they led believed that the war would be over by Christmas. The French cried, "To Berlin," the Germans, "To Paris." The Germans came closer to victory, But in the scorching summer heat, their advance on Paris broke down. Soon a war of movement became a war of artillery and fixed positions. The first trenches appeared. From the English Channel to Switzerland, the front line was frozen. In what became known as the Zone of the Armies, the destruction mounted. By 1915, the casualties were already being measured in millions. Into the French rear passed a flood of refugees. Some of them were thought to be spies. The war had cut Mata Hari off from her house and possessions in Paris. She left Germany for her native Holland, which was a neutral country. In The Hague, she reached a comfortable financial arrangement with one of her old lovers, the Baron Edouard van der Capellen, who gave her a house and a generous allowance. On the Western Front in 1915, living conditions were less agreeable. Soldiers struggled through a landscape dominated by mud and water-filled shell holes. In places, the mud was so deep that men and mules drowned in it. Both sides waited for the breakthrough that never came. It was a war dominated by the machine gun and the spade. Meanwhile, in Holland, Mata Hari was overcome by boredom. She decided to return to France via England. Mata Hari was unaware that British intelligence already had its eye on her. When her steamer docked at Folkestone, she was interrogated and her luggage searched. The British concluded that she was not above suspicion and should not be admitted again. In France, the deadlock of the trenches continued. February 1916 saw the start of a 10-month battle for the French fortress system of Verdun. The terrible slogging match was to claim 500,000 casualties. As this battle reached its climax, Mata Hari had also excited the suspicion of the French authorities. In Paris, she was tailed by two men of the Deuxième Bureau, the French Office of Military Counter-Espionage. It was run from this anonymous apartment in the Boulevard Saint-Germain by the corpulent and unprepossessing Captain Georges Ladoux. The spy catcher Ladoux had already decided to ensnare the most exotic wartime agent of them all. Wartime Paris was full of Allied officers on leave. Mata Hari's tales duly noted the stream of military men she entertained in discreet hotels. She loved the uniforms, even wearing them herself on occasion, but she also desperately needed the money. Spy fever now stalked France. Agents of the enemy were blamed for every French reverse. The Deuxième Bureau ensured that the firing squads were kept busy. Ladoux decided to trap Mata Hari by hiring her as a double agent. He later claimed that when he met Mata Hari for the first time, she admitted that she was working for the Germans. She agreed to seduce the Crown Prince William, the commander of the German forces at Verdun, for a fee of 1 million francs. On her way back to Holland, aboard the ferry Hollandia, she had another encounter with British intelligence. On the quay at Falmouth was Inspector George Reed Grant of Scotland Yard's Special Branch.
With my wife, whose job was to search female passengers, I boarded the ship and challenged Mata Hari as to her real identity. We detained her and removed her from the ship, and she was eventually escorted to Scotland Yard. From my experience, I consider her one of the most charming specimens of female humanity that ever I gazed upon.
At Scotland Yard, Mata Hari told her interrogators that Ladoux would vouch for her and confirm that she was working for the French. The Assistant Commissioner, Sir Basil Thompson, was unimpressed by Mata Hari's fanciful accounts of her espionage activities. After waiting 4 days, he decided to deliver a message the short distance to the Dutch legation. In it, Sir Basil expressed his grave suspicion that the woman he held, and who had now reverted to calling herself Lady MacLeod, might be involved in what he termed the commission of unneutral acts. He also cabled Leeuwarden, who denied any connection with Mata Hari and suggested that she should be returned to Spain, where she might reveal her connections with the German Secret Service. Sent back to the fleshpots of Madrid and unaware that Leeuwarden had betrayed her, Mata Hari began to act out the role of the spy seductress. Her first conquest was the German envoy in Madrid, Major Arnold Calle. The information Mata Hari gleaned from Calle she passed to the French military attaché in Madrid. Her aim was to establish her credentials as a double agent with the French, but in this she was not as successful as she thought. Major Calle had his suspicions and began using Mata Hari to see how much disinformation he could feed the French. Meanwhile, in Paris, Leeuwarden was now ready to move in for the kill. Time was beginning to run out for Mata Hari. In January 1917, she returned to a France seething with war weariness and discontent. The situation was becoming critical. Strikes interrupted war production, and in the army mutiny was brewing after the bloodletting at Verdun. The courage and endurance of the French fighting man had been tested almost to destruction. Among the troops in the front line, morale had sunk to rock bottom. In Paris, spy mania became ever more frenzied. The hand of German intelligence was seen in everything, from the petty restrictions and discomforts of daily life to the failure to smash through the enemy lines on the Western Front. A blood sacrifice was needed. Captain Leeuwarden had one up his sleeve. On the 13th of February 1917, Mata Hari was arrested in her room at the Elysee Palace Hotel. She was taken to the Saint-Lazare prison. Here, stripped of all her finery, Mata Hari underwent a seemingly endless round of interrogations by Ledoux' right-hand man, Captain Bouchardon, an austere lawyer who now pursued spies with a fanatical zeal. Bouchardon accused Mata Hari of being a shadowy German agent codenamed H-21. H-21 had been the subject of a series of German coded signals sent between Madrid and Berlin and intercepted by a French listening station on the Eiffel Tower. Leeuwarden was convinced that Mata Hari was H-21. Later, he admitted that the whole affair might have been a setup by German intelligence. The prisoner now looked her age. At first, she coolly denied that she had received any money from the Germans. Then, after more than a month of harsh questioning, she changed her tune. She told Bouchardon that she was H-21. She had taken money from the Germans, but only to compensate her for the valuables she had been forced to leave behind in Berlin in 1914. All along, she had wanted to help France and deal a blow to Germany. She could not deny that she had entertained many Allied officers, but for sex, not military information. In July 1917, Mata Hari was brought to trial before a military tribunal in the Palais de Justice. The atmosphere was charged by the trauma of a mutiny in the French army only 1 month before the trial began. The sacrifices made at Verdun and in another doomed offensive launched in April 1917 had proved too much. The mutiny had been quelled and the ringleaders punished, many of them by firing squad. Others were stripped of their rank. Pay and conditions were improved. The army was hauled back from the brink of collapse. The war would continue, but a scapegoat was needed. Who better than Mata Hari, whose decadent demands for luxury had caused the deaths of thousands of young Frenchmen? At the trial, she was to be portrayed as a blood-sucking international woman who had abandoned husband and family to live a life of sexual independence. What had seemed exciting about Mata Hari before the war now only confirmed the charges leveled against her. She was a woman in a man's world. The prosecution relied almost entirely on the radio signals about H21 intercepted by the listeners on the Eiffel Tower. But these had been doctored by Ledoux to bolster his case. No one produced the original intercepts. At no point in the trial was Ledoux obliged to reveal that he had hired Mata Hari to work for the French. Bouchardon called Mata Hari the greatest woman spy of the century. In the court's eyes, Mata Hari was condemned as much by her reputation as by the flimsy evidence presented by the prosecution. The court heard several former lovers testify that Mata Hari had never attempted to pry secrets from them. But the outcome was inevitable, and the trial lasted less than 2 days. Mata Hari was condemned to death. "It's impossible," she cried, as the sentence was passed. She was taken to the infamous cell number 12 at Saint-Lazare, reserved for those awaiting execution. The French president, Poincaré, refused to commute her sentence. There she remained, comforted by a nun, Sister Léonie, for whom she would dance in her bleak cell. Mata Hari's aged lawyer, Clunet, another old lover, attempted to halt her execution by claiming that she was pregnant with his child. But nothing could prevent her rendezvous with the firing squad in the cavalry grounds outside the fortress at Vincennes. A jubilant Bouchardon arrived to relish the results of his handiwork. Mata Hari went to her death with calm courage. She had had a long time to rehearse this final performance. She coolly brushed away the offer of a blindfold, greeted her executioners like old friends, and continued to talk to them as they raised their rifles to take aim. Then the volley rang out. It was boredom, not just French bullets, that killed Mata Hari. Had she stayed in the provincial backwater of Holland, Mata Hari would have survived the war to live on her memories and provide a lively footnote to the social history of turn-of-the-century Europe. But the quiet canals and trim houses of her native land were no match for the pleasures of Paris. She had always lived dangerously, and in Paris, Mata Hari embarked on the last and greatest game of her life. If by sheer willpower she could convince Parisian society that her Oriental dancing was authentic, then surely she could convince Ledoux that she could be the international spy of his imagining. As a dancer, she had made up the rules as she went along. When she tried to do the same as an amateur spy, she tripped and fell. Legend swiftly grew up around her. There were rumors that Mata Hari had somehow survived the firing squad and gone into hiding. She did not. But her legend did not die, growing over the years to overlay the real events which had led to her execution. She had found her place in history. Hollywood quickly appropriated Mata Hari, or at least the Mata Hari of popular imagination. In 1931, Greta Garbo played her as a vamp who goes to her death unrepentant. The real woman remains elusive, hidden behind the mask she made for herself as the eye of the day.